There is a specific kind of silence that lives inside a lie you are not supposed to know about yet. I have felt that silence my whole life in my father's house. In the careful way certain conversations stopped when I walked into a room, in the particular brightness of my mother Susan's smile on the days when the brightness was covering something, in the way Gary looked at me across dinner tables and through doorways with the expression of a man who had made a decision he was not ready to defend out loud. I had been feeling that silence for 18 years by the time I understood what it had been covering. And when I finally understood, when the thing underneath the silence became visible and undeniable and too large to be managed by anyone's careful brightness, it did not arrive as a surprise so much as a confirmation of the thing I had been trying not to know for years. My name is Natalie. I am the older child in a family of 4. Gary, Susan, my brother Kevin, and me. I am 23 years old. I graduated 6 weeks ago from a university I attended on a full merit scholarship, a scholarship I won on the basis of academic performance so consistent and so documented that the awards committee had, according to the letter that accompanied the offer, not deliberated long. I graduated with honors. I graduated with a thesis that my department chair, Dr. Jennifer Harris, described at our final meeting as the strongest undergraduate research she had supervised in 14 years of teaching. I graduated into a graduate program offer that covers tuition and living expenses, and that I accepted on the same day I received it without needing to think about it because there was nothing to think about. It was the next step in the direction I had been walking since I was old enough to understand that walking in a direction was something you chose. I tell you all of this first because I want you to understand something. I did not get here because my family supported me. I got here because I refused to need them to. The university savings account had been opened when I was born. I know this because my grandmother, Gary's mother, a woman named Edna who had worked as a school librarian for 30 years and who believed in education with the specific, fierce conviction of someone who had watched it change lives from the front row, had established it herself. She had put money in every birthday, every Christmas, every occasion that allowed for a deposit for 17 years. By the time I was finishing high school, the account held $42,000. Not enough for everything, but enough for a foundation. Enough to make university possible without the debt that reshapes the first decade of a person's adult life. I knew about the account because Grandma Edna had told me about it herself, sat me down at her kitchen table when I was 15, opened the statement, showed me the number, and said, "This is for your education. Natalie, your father has access to it now because you're not 18 yet, but it is yours and it is for school and it is not for anything else." She died the following year. She died before I turned 18. And without her alive to say again what she had said at her kitchen table, the account became something else, became, in Gary's accounting, a resource in the general pool of family finances, available to be directed as he directed things, which was always in the direction of Kevin. Kevin was 16 when Gary bought him the setup. I want to be specific about what the setup was because the specificity matters, not because a gaming setup is inherently a wrong thing to buy a teenager, but because of what it cost and what it came from, and what Gary said about it, which was nothing. He said nothing about where the money came from. He said nothing to me. He had the setup delivered on a Tuesday while I was at school, and when I came home, Kevin was in his bedroom surrounded by monitors and equipment and the specific glow of a teenager who has been given something he had been wanting for a long time. I asked Gary that evening, quietly, in the kitchen while Susan was making dinner, where the money for the setup had come from. He said they had saved up for it. I said, "From where?" He said, "From various places." The way people say various places when they mean one specific place they do not want to name. I said, Did it come from my account? The one Grandma Edna started. He looked at me with the expression he used when he was deciding between a lie and a deflection, and had not yet chosen. He said, "We needed to make some adjustments. You'll still be able to go to school. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out." I was 17 years old, and I was standing in my mother's kitchen, and my father had just told me, in the specific language of a man who needed the situation to sound more reasonable than it was, that the $42,000 my grandmother had spent 17 years building for my future had been redirected to a gaming setup for my brother, and that we would figure it out. I looked at Gary, and then I looked away. I looked away because I was 17 and I did not yet have the words for what I was feeling, and because the words I did have were not words I could say in that kitchen without something breaking that I was not sure could be put back together. I looked away, and I went to my room and I sat on my bed, and I thought about Grandma Edna at her kitchen table with the statement in her hand saying, "This is for your education, Natalie, it is not for anything else." I thought about her saying that directly to Gary's mother's kitchen table, with Gary in the house, with Gary knowing. And I made a decision that night that I have never once regretted. I decided I would not need the $42,000, not because it hadn't been mine. It had been mine. Grandma Edna had said so. And the fact that Gary had taken it did not change the fact of whose it was. But needing it meant depending on Gary to restore it or explain it or make it right. And I had just watched Gary look me in the eye and say, "We'll figure it out," about money my dead grandmother had saved for 17 years. And I understood in that moment, with the clarity of someone whose last illusion has just been removed, that Gary was not a person whose figure it out I could afford to wait for. I would make my own figure it out. I opened a notebook that night, a plain spiral notebook I used for school, and I wrote at the top of the first page what I need and how I am going to get it. And I spent the next several months becoming, with a focus that I think frightened my teachers slightly, the best student I was capable of being. I had always been a good student, naturally, without much effort, the kind of student who read ahead and asked questions and found ideas genuinely interesting in a way that some people have to perform, and I simply had. But this was different. This was not natural ability running at its casual pace. This was natural ability pointed at a specific target, given a deadline, given a reason that was personal and immediate, and located in a specific Tuesday evening in a kitchen. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I researched them with the same thoroughness I brought to academic work, reading the criteria, understanding what each committee was looking for, tailoring my applications not to say what I thought they wanted to hear, but to say the true things about myself in the language that would make those true things legible to the people reading them. I applied for 12 scholarships in my final year of high school. I received responses from 9. 6 of those responses were offers. The full merit scholarship was the largest. When the letter came, I was in the kitchen, the same house, the same table. And I opened it standing up because I had been waiting for it and could not make myself sit down. Susan was there. She watched me read it. When I looked up, she had tears in her eyes, and she said, "Natalie," in the voice she used when she was genuinely moved, the voice that came from underneath the management of Gary's household, the voice of my mother rather than Gary's wife. Gary came in from the other room. I showed him the letter. He read it. I watched him read it. And I watched his face do the thing it did when information arrived that required him to recalibrate without having anywhere visible to put the recalibration. He read the scholarship amount, and he read the merit citation, and he read the honors designation, and he put the letter down on the table. He said, "Well, good." 2 words. 2 words for a full merit scholarship and 2 words for the daughter he had taken $42,000 from, and 2 words for the 17 months I had spent making myself so undeniable that no committee in the country could look away from my application. Well, good. Delivered in the flat tone of a man who had been proven wrong and had chosen not to use the word wrong about himself. I picked up the letter. I said, "I won't need the savings. I did not say which you stole. I did not say which Grandma Edna left for me. I said I won't need the savings," in the same flat tone he had used for well, good, and I let the sentence sit between us with everything it contained, which was everything, which was the Tuesday evening and the gaming setup and the "we'll figure it out" and the decision I had made in my room that night, and I let him carry it. Then I went to pack for orientation. The 4 years of university were not years I will describe as easy. Easy is not the word. They were years of extraordinary work. The thesis, the research, the late nights, and the early mornings, and the specific discipline of someone who understood that the scholarship was not just money, it was evidence. It was the documented record of what I was capable of, and it required maintenance. I maintained it. I exceeded it. Dr. Harris came to find me after the presentation of my third-year research paper and said she wanted to talk about what I was planning to do next, and that conversation was the beginning of the graduate program, offer that would shape the next 5 years of my life. I called home on Sundays. Not every Sunday. I was not performing the devoted daughter for an audience that had not earned the performance. But Sundays often, because Susan was on the other end of the Sunday calls, and Susan in her limited way loved me. And I loved her back in the specific way you love a parent who was not strong enough to protect you, but who was also not the one who took the thing. Gary was sometimes on the calls, briefly, passing through, saying the things fathers say when they are not sure how to be fathers to daughters they have wronged. He asked about school. I gave him the factual updates. We maintained a surface that was functional and not warm, and that I had decided was the most honest available shape for what we were. Kevin, I should tell you, had used the gaming setup for approximately 14 months before he lost significant interest in it and moved on to other things. He was 20 by the time I graduated. A young man who had not yet figured out what he wanted to do with himself, which was not entirely his fault, and which I held in the appropriate place in my accounting of him, which was the setup was not Kevin's crime. Kevin had been given things without being taught the cost of them, and that was Gary's doing and not Kevin's, and Kevin was someone I could love separately from the anger I carried about how he had been used as the justification for what was taken from me. The graduation ceremony was on a Saturday morning in May. Gary and Susan and Kevin drove down for it. I had not asked them to come. I had mentioned the date, and the mention was the invitation. And they came, which was something. I walked across that stage in the specific haze of a moment you have been moving toward for so long that arriving in it feels simultaneously real and impossible. Dr. Harris was there. My best friend Stephanie was in the audience, having driven 4 hours to be present, because Stephanie was the kind of friend who drove 4 hours and didn't mention it. And Gary was there, Gary in a jacket I had not seen before, sitting in the audience with his program in his hands and the expression of a man who was attending something he did not entirely understand how to be present at. They announced my honors. They announced the thesis distinction. They announced, because it had been listed in the program as a note of particular achievement, the graduate scholarship. And then Dr. Harris, who was giving the faculty address at this ceremony, and who had told me 2 days earlier that she intended to mention my work, said my name from the podium. She said it in the middle of a passage about what research at this level required. Not just intelligence, she said, but the specific courage of a student who has no safety net and knows it and works anyway, who has no one behind her in the way that some students have people behind them, and who builds the net herself mid-fall and arrives somewhere extraordinary. She did not know about Gary and the $42,000 and the gaming setup on a Tuesday in a kitchen 11 months before this university had been a real possibility. She did not know the specific shape of the safety net I had been building myself. She knew my work and she knew my capacity, and she had, in the language of a faculty address, described the thing underneath the work without knowing what the thing was. I looked at the stage. I did not look at Gary. I didn't need to look at Gary. I knew what was on his face. I had watched his face for 23 years, and I knew every expression it had, and I knew which one was sitting on it in that moment. The one he used when evidence arrived that could not be argued with, that could not be deflected with "we'll figure it out," or "well, good," that sat in front of him, requiring to be seen for exactly what it was. After the ceremony, on the lawn, in the specific, beautiful chaos of hundreds of graduates and their families finding each other among the rented chairs and the scattered programs, Gary found me. He was holding my program. He had written nothing in it, but he had been holding it for 2 hours, and the edges were slightly bent in the way things bend when someone holds them too tightly for too long. He said, "Dr. Harris thinks very highly of you." I said, "Yes." "The graduate program." He said, "Is that what you want? Is that the right next step?" "Yes," I said. He looked at the program. He looked at the program, and he looked at my name on it, and he looked at the honors designation and the thesis distinction and the scholarship citation, and he held it in his too tight grip. And he said, "I should have." He stopped. I waited. "I should have done right by the account." He said, "I should have. Natalie, I should have done right by it." Not the full sentence, not the complete accounting of the Tuesday and the setup and the "we'll figure it out" and the 17 months I spent making myself so unignorable that the absence of his money became irrelevant. Not the thing he owed, the real thing, the full honest reckoning of a father who had looked at his daughter and seen a resource and looked at his son and seen a person. But the start of it, the beginning of words in the direction of what was true. I looked at my father. I thought about Grandma Edna at the kitchen table. "This is for your education, Natalie. It is not for anything else." She had been right about the money, and she had been right about something else too, something she had said at that same table that I had not understood then the way I understood it now. She had said, "The education cannot be taken back. Once you have it, it is yours in a way that money cannot be, because money can be moved and spent and redirected, and it is gone. But what you build in your mind, what you build in your work, what you make real through your own effort, that cannot be redirected, that lives in you, that is the thing they can never take." She had known. She had known that Gary had access to the account. She had known what access meant in Gary's hands. And she had told me anyway, not because she could stop him, but because she wanted me to know that the account was not the point. The account was a tool. I was the point. What I would build was the point. The $42,000 was a tool she had given me, and if the tool was taken, what I built without it would be built stronger, because I had built it without it. She had been 3 steps ahead of everyone. She was not here to see where those steps had led. I felt that absence the way I felt it at every milestone, acutely, specifically, in the particular place where she would have stood if she had been able to stand. I said to Gary, "Yes, you should have." 3 words, matching his 3 words, returning them to him with the slight weight of what they contained, which was everything, which was enough. "Is there anything I can do now?" he said. I thought about the question honestly, the way I thought about everything honestly. "You can be present for what comes next," I said. "Not to make up for it. That's not what I mean. I mean, if you want to know who I am and what I'm building, I'll let you know. But it will be because you're interested, not because you owe me, because the owing part, I've made my peace with the owing part. I did that when I opened the notebook. He didn't know about the notebook. He looked slightly confused. The night you told me you'd figure it out, I said. I went to my room and I made my own plan. That was when I stopped waiting for you to fix it. He absorbed this. Susan appeared beside him and put her hand through his arm and looked at me with the wet eyes she had had since the ceremony, since Dr. Harris had said no safety net in a faculty address on a Saturday in May. And I looked at my mother, and I felt the complicated love that was always available for Susan even when everything else was complicated. The love for the woman who had not been strong enough and who had loved me anyway from inside her own limitations. Stephanie appeared behind me and said, because Stephanie knew me well enough to know when a conversation had reached its natural end and that I needed rescuing from the continuation of it. Natalie, they want the graduates for a group photo. Come on. I looked at Gary. I looked at Susan. I said, I have to go. And I went toward Stephanie, toward the group photo, toward the rest of the afternoon that belonged to this day and this achievement, and the 5 years ahead of it that were going to be built the same way the last 4 had been built, which was by me on my own terms, with the specific fire of a woman who had been given a notebook and a Tuesday evening and a dead grandmother's voice in her head saying, this is yours, it is not for anything else. I crossed the lawn in my graduation gown. The sun was doing what May's sun does when it decides to cooperate, warm and generous and entirely indifferent to the drama of human families on lawns with bent programs. I thought about Grandma Edna. I thought about $42,000 and what it had become, not a loss in the final accounting, but a direction, the specific direction of a woman who had been pointed away from dependence by the very act of having her dependence stolen, who had built the thing she built because she had to build it without a net, because the net had been taken, because there was no figure-it-out coming from Gary, and she had known it, and she had planned accordingly. The group photo happened. I am in the center of it, not because I arranged to be, but because the photographer asked the honors graduates to come forward, and I was one of them, and I came forward because that was the thing I had learned to do, finally, completely without apology. Come forward. Take the place that was earned. Stand in the center of a thing I had built, and let it be documented. Let it be real. Because it was real. Because I had made it real. Because nothing, not a Tuesday and a gaming setup and a father's deflection and $42,000 redirected. Nothing had been able to prevent it. And nothing ever would. Not ever. Not anymore.